The wind howled through the withered pine trees, blending with the gentle murmur of the stream flowing in the darkness. A fine drizzle began to fall, dancing on the pitch-black surface of the water, creating concentric ripples that spread out and vanished. The cold moonlight occasionally pierced through thick black clouds, reflecting twisted, distorted images on the water. Much like Dany's fate on that fateful September night in 1996, the chirping of insects in the underbrush suddenly ceased, as if nature itself sensed something was terribly wrong. A muffled scream broke the silence, then vanished into the night, leaving only a haunting stillness behind. While the small town of Montana lay fast asleep, a horrifying crime was unfolding in the shadows, leaving behind wounds that would never heal, in a family's heart, and in the soul of this peaceful community. Dany, a 15-year-old girl with golden hair that usually draped over her shoulders, a radiant smile, and sparkling blue eyes full of innocence, never imagined that September day would be her last. That morning, she put on her favorite pale pink t-shirt and a pair of faded blue jeans, kissed her mother goodbye, and cheerfully walked out the door to school, promising to be home before dinner. But fate had other plans for this lively, vibrant girl. As the afternoon turned to dusk, and hours passed with no word from Dany, worry began to creep into the hearts of her family like a poisonous fog. At first, they tried to reassure themselves. Perhaps she stayed at a friend's house or joined a last-minute school activity. But when repeated calls went unanswered, and her classmates insisted they hadn't seen her after school, fear began to tighten its grip on every family member's mind. They knew something was wrong. Something had happened to their daughter, their little sister. In growing desperation, family and friends organized their own search party, splitting into small groups, armed with flashlights and walkie-talkies, combing through streets, dark alleys, small forests near the school, and desolate open fields. They called Dany's name through the night, their voices growing hoarse with anxiety. Their cries echoed down empty streets, bounced back from silent buildings, but were answered only by a dreadful silence. A silence that seemed to swallow every sliver of hope. Flashlights swept across every corner, bush, crevice, and the small stream, searching for the tiniest clue, a familiar bracelet, a scrap of pink fabric, or any trace of the missing girl. Searchers, their faces tense and eyes red from exhaustion, pushed on relentlessly, fueled by nothing but hope, even as black clouds gathered above and drizzle soaked their shoulders. Then the worst, the unthinkable, happened. Under the flickering beam of a flashlight near the stream bank where tall reeds grew thick, they discovered a small, lifeless figure, partially submerged in damp soil. Time stood still as a search team member approached, knelt down, and gently turned the body. A wave of horror swept over the area as they recognized the pale, still face. Dany was gone, her pink t-shirt now stained with mud and water, her golden hair tangled and dirty, and her bright blue eyes shut forever, no longer reflecting the joy of life. The mother's anguished scream upon recognizing her daughter, Stephanie's choked sobs as she clung to her sister's cold body, and the gasps and horrified cries of those present tore through the stillness of the night, marking the beginning of a long, painful journey for justice. The days that followed unfolded like an unending nightmare for Dany's family. The home, once filled with laughter, now sank into a chilling silence. Her belongings remained untouched, her jacket still hanging by the door, her diary left open on the last page she wrote, as if she might walk in at any moment. But the harsh reality hit them each morning. They would never see Dany again. They faced not only the gut-wrenching pain of losing a child, a pain that tore through their hearts like claws, but also an alarming lack of information from law enforcement. The local police seemed to employ delay tactics and evasions, unwilling or unable to provide any details about Dany's death. The family's questions were often met with vague answers, shrugged shoulders, or empty promises of follow-up calls that never came. Photos of Dany were placed all around the house, her bright smile serving as a bitter reminder that justice had not been served. Dany, Dany's younger sister, would sit for hours staring at those pictures, the 13-year-old girl's eyes now carrying a maturity far beyond her years. burdened by the memory of her sister's cruel and mysterious death. The family felt abandoned by those they trusted to bring them justice, betrayed by a system that was supposed to protect them. In their darkest hour, when despair threatened to consume them, a faint glimmer of hope arrived in the form of Tom Elfmont, a retired detective with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that exuded confidence. Tall and lean with a silver mustache, Tom brought decades of investigative experience and a reputation for relentless determination in solving the toughest cases. Tom had come across a newspaper article about Dany's case and sensed something wasn't right with how it had been handled. He reached out to the grieving family, especially Stephanie. In the living room filled with Dany's photos, with unwavering resolve in his eyes, he promised them he wouldn't give up until he uncovered the truth. No matter how long it took, no matter how many obstacles he faced, his promise, simple yet firm, became the only thing the family could cling to in the difficult days ahead. A lifeline in an ocean of sorrow and despair. Initially, the local police, with their inexperienced team and limited resources, had hastily concluded that Dany's death was an accident by drowning. They presented the family with a straightforward scenario. She had likely wandered near the stream after school, slipped on the muddy bank, and fallen into the water when no one was around. Lacking swimming skills, Dany had tragically drowned. It was a clean, convenient conclusion that required little investigation, and more importantly, wouldn't stir unrest in the small, peaceful town, where a murder could shatter the community's very sense of security. At a brief meeting at the police station, the local sheriff, his face stern but eyes unable to meet the grieving family's gaze, delivered this conclusion. He even patted the devastated father on the shoulder, advising him to accept this tragic accident and move on. Dany's family, though heartbroken and filled with doubt, lacked the evidence or expertise to challenge the conclusion. They tried to come to terms with the cruel reality and began the long, painful mourning process. They held a funeral for Dany, a ceremony filled with flowers and tears, with heartfelt elegies from friends and teachers. But the truth, like a wounded wild beast, can never be buried forever. It always finds a way to rise up, breaking through layers of earth and stone, no matter how thick. And that was exactly what happened on a stormy, rain-soaked day, when Tom Elfmont brought the family a set of medical records he had fought hard to obtain from the local hospital. With trembling hands, the mother flipped through the pages, her eyes widening in horror as she read the dry, clinical lines that concealed an unspeakable truth. The family had finally uncovered the horrifying reality behind Dany's death. She had not drowned in an accident, as they had been told. There was no sign of water in her lungs, something that would have been present in a real drowning. Instead, there were bruises on her neck, shoulders, and back, and scratches on her skin that could not have been caused by falling into water. Most terrifying of all, the coroner's report indicated that Dany had been forcibly held down, her head pressed into the mud until she stopped breathing. A deliberate, brutal execution. And there were clear signs of sexual assault prior to death, with injuries and foreign DNA found on her body. This truth struck the family like a violent blow, shaking them from a resigned acceptance of fate and igniting a burning fury, a determination to uncover the killer. The mother collapsed to the floor, her anguished sobs tearing through the air. The father, face frozen in rage, clenched his fists so tightly that his nails pierced his palms, blood dripping onto the floor. And Stephanie, her eyes dry and wide, stared at the pages of the report with a newfound resolve etched deep into her soul. Her sister's killer would pay. The years passed like a slow-moving river. Spring came and went. The posters bearing her smiling face, once plastered around town, had faded and torn, carried off by the wind or covered by new advertisements. To many townsfolk, the story of the mysteriously murdered girl became a ghost story for Halloween nights, a vague warning to mischievous children tempted to go out after dark. But Stephanie, now a young woman with weary eyes and a steely determination, never allowed herself to give up. Every time she closed her eyes, she still saw her sister's face, still heard Dany's laughter echo in her mind, still felt her presence in every significant moment of life. She always believed that one day, justice would be served, that the murderer would be forced to face the consequences of their cruelty. Stephanie turned pain into purpose and loss into strength. She studied law, investigative techniques, and became an unrelenting advocate for justice. She knocked on the doors of every authority she could find, from the local police department to the district attorney's office, from victim support nonprofits to the media. She organized awareness events. The revelation shook the entire community. Paul Hutchinson wasn't a stranger, not some drifter from elsewhere. He was someone the family had once trusted, someone they had met and spoken with. That betrayal only deepened the pain they had carried for years. As investigators prepared to arrest Hutchinson, an unexpected twist occurred. Before they could reach him, Hutchinson took his own life, carrying many secrets about his motives to the grave. They found his body in his bedroom, a hunting rifle by his side, and a short note on the table. The note contained no confession, no explanation of his actions toward Dany, only a few brief lines apologizing to his family and friends for letting them down. It was a sad and unsatisfying ending, one that offered no true closure to the case or the victim's family. Later DNA tests confirmed with near certainty that Hutchinson was responsible for Dany's death. The DNA collected from her body was a perfect match with his, finally solving the case after many years. But his death had robbed the family of the chance to hear a confession, to understand why he had committed such a monstrous act, to confront the man who had stolen their beloved daughter and sister. Though the case had been legally resolved, justice still felt incomplete for Dany's family. They continued to live with anger and bitterness, not only toward Hutchinson, but also toward the local police department for their mishandling of the case and the misinformation they had been given. They believed that had the police taken the case seriously from the start, had they treated Dany's death as a possible murder rather than a tragic accident, the truth might have come to light much sooner, and perhaps Hutchinson would have faced a court of law, would have been held accountable in front of a jury and the family, rather than escaping justice through suicide. At a press conference after the case was closed, the local police chief defended his team, saying they had done all they could with the technology and resources available at the time. But this justification did little to ease the pain and anger of Dany's family. They knew too well that many of the mistakes were not due to a lack of tools, but a lack of care and responsibility. The crime scene hadn't been properly secured, witnesses hadn't been interviewed promptly, and most crucially, Dany's death had been prematurely ruled an accident, without a thorough investigation. Stephanie, with the support of Tom Elfmont and several community activists, organized a peaceful protest outside the local police department. They demanded an independent investigation into the handling of Dany's case and reforms and how similar cases would be managed in the future. The protest drew the attention of hundreds of locals and regional media, putting Dany's story back in the public eye. But Stephanie didn't stop there. She understood the problem ran deeper, into the very systems that governed law enforcement funding and oversight. Like many similar agencies across Montana, the local police department lacked resources, training, and independent oversight. It was a systemic issue that needed fixing to ensure future cases wouldn't be mishandled as Dany's had been. Stephanie began pushing for broader changes. She attended city council meetings, wrote letters to state legislators, and even testified before the state's judicial committee to share her story. She became a tireless advocate for reforming how Montana funds and oversees its law enforcement, with the hope that no other family would have to endure what hers had gone through. Stephanie's efforts began to pay off. Some state legislators began drafting new laws to improve homicide investigations, especially those involving children and teens. A special fund was established to support additional training for law enforcement in crime scene analysis and investigative techniques. And a proposal was made to establish an independent civilian oversight board to review complaints of police misconduct and recommend future reforms. These were small but meaningful steps in a long journey to ensure justice for all, regardless of who they were or where they came from. And for Stephanie, it was a crucial part of her healing, a way to turn her painful loss into something positive, a way to ensure Dany's death was not in vain. More than 20 years had passed since that fateful day in September 1996. Yet the memory of Dany lived on in the hearts of those who loved her. Her family held a small memorial each year at the site where her body was found, a place now turned into a quiet garden filled with wildflowers and a stone bench where loved ones could sit and speak to her. They brought photos, small gifts she had once cherished, and sometimes a new book, as Dany had always loved to read.